Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, February the 14th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about lasagna gardening. We'll do the Feedback Friday thing, and we'll talk about farming as the great connector. Maybe so, or maybe not. Got to leave some suspense in there. So let's do it. All right, well, welcome to Friday. It is going to be a wet, cold weekend here with next week looking pretty bitter, but just a few more cold snaps until go time, so cheers to that. It's Feedback Friday, which means we are going to take a look back at this week's topics and see what you all were saying on Monday. That was when we discussed the farmer grants and contracts being frozen. That episode got over 10 times the number of comments these videos normally do, but shout out to the few of you who commented about some of the other topics, like the farming and gambling comparison or the foliar spray breakdown. I liked this simple one from @CatsFunkFabulousFinds, 97045, great name, who asked, quote, "Do you use compost tea?" End quote. It's a great question, and I don't use them as much as I used to. I don't necessarily have a problem with compost teas, especially if you know what you're doing when making them, but I have found that the microbial solution that I like the most is the Jadam microorganism solution, or JMS solution, which I guess I don't have to say solution and JMS, right? It's a little redundant, but anyway, I've talked about that one before. I apply that to the roots of plants before they go out into the soil or into the furrow when I'm planting potatoes, for instance, but that's become kind of quickly my favorite soil inoculant. I'll talk more about compost teas though soon. It's a fun topic. As for the government funding stuff, we talked about how farmers of all scales, as well as farm organizations and farm researchers and farmers markets, were being impacted by the Trump administration's freeze on funding for existing contracts. Obviously, there were a lot of thoughts on this, and honestly, given the sensitivity of the particular subject matter, the comments were largely pretty reasonable. So good on you all. I don't have a lot to add there to what I said. It's just not really okay to delay and cancel existing contracts, government contracts or otherwise. We got a new ag secretary confirmed yesterday, though, so hopefully resolutions will come swiftly. Reading through the comments, though, I did have somewhat of an epiphany, I guess you could say, that people think grants are really easy to get. I kept seeing this phrase handout or free money, and just so it's clear, these funds are definitely not just handed out to people. For farmers and researchers, grants and government programs are generally a lot of work to apply for, work to fulfill, and then work to keep track of, in terms of the spending. I generally equate it to getting another job or taking on some contracted labor on your own farm. The SARE grant, for instance, is considered kind of one of the easier ones, and it's an almost year-long process just to get the grant that goes through a couple different applications and a review process. And then once you receive the funds, there is a lot of reporting that has to be done on how the funds are used. And that's among, like I said, the easier grants to get. Perhaps the easiest grant to get is not really a grant at all. It's the NRCS EQIP cost share program. And that one is used for things like high tunnels, where you can only buy and construct a high tunnel with it. And it may not cover the entire cost. It often still takes like 6 months or a year or multiple years, depending on when the funds are released versus when you sign up. These are just some of the contracts being held up and some of the easier ones to get, so to speak. So yeah, the funding freeze is a bummer. And good things come from grants, good environmental things, good farming things, good businesses, lower costs for consumers. I mean, keep in mind that Tesla, to use an ironic example, but a contemporary one, benefited tremendously from taxpayers in its early years. The company may not exist without low interest loans or the $7,500 tax credit in the early 2010s for EVs, among other benefits that taxpayers paid for. In fact, it was just disclosed that Tesla secured $400 million in contracts for armored vehicles coming up from taxpayers. I saw a lot of folks saying something to the effect of that farms shouldn't need taxpayer money. Well, sure, it can be done without assistance, and lots of people do it. But in that scenario, farms would be also one of the few businesses out there that didn't rely on some tax-funded incentives in order to get started or to grow their business. And that's fine. offer government grants or not in the future. I don't care. I just don't want to see people holding farmers to a standard we don't hold any other businesses to. Not saying abuse doesn't happen. Giant corporations often get contracts and grants and tax breaks that taxpayers ultimately fund, and they're not easy for us to keep track of. But there is a reason corporations hate bureaucracy. There is a lot of work that stands between that corporation and getting tax money. Abusing taxpayer money is just not super easy to do, especially as a small farmer. Of course, farm subsidies are a different thing, not really super available to most small-scale growers, and also beyond the scope of this particular Feedback Friday. So on Tuesday, we did the spring lettuce breakdown, and I thought this was a helpful comment about a popular alternative to Salanova from @SteveHatcher770, who wrote, quote, experiment with the easy leaf lettuce varieties, as well as some of the other one-cut lettuces available at Johnny's and other seed vendors. Most are far cheaper than Salanova. Some have yields and crispy qualities that approach Salanova. Germination rates can be not quite as great, so get your germination process down to pat to minimize the risk of those kinds of losses. Germ chambers may be a must if you're growing significant volume, especially during the heat of summer. Salanova is about 1/3 of our lettuce mix, easy leaf about 50% plus, and other one-cuts fill in the last 10 or 15%. Keeps the costs a bit lower and the mix a bit more diverse than the same old 2 greens, 2 reds Salanova mixes that others are selling. Easy Leaf is, I presume, busy breeding new varieties to try to catch up to the market leader, Salanova. So some varieties disappear after a few years and new ones take their place. So be prepared to be switching to new varieties every so often. Same with some of the other one cuts. Here it appears the seed vendors may drop some after a while because sales are low, end quote. Nothing to add there, really. I like the idea of things like the easy leaf varieties from places like High Mowing, because you should try as a grower to not get too attached to any one variety. Varieties change over time. They disappear. Diversity, diversity, diversity. It's always a good idea. Great comments all over that one. On Wednesday, we discussed what I am both good and bad at when it comes to farming. And this was a great question from @Bent5732, who wrote, quote, anyone here know a good guide to make a market garden business plan? Honestly, just an example of a good one would be rad, end quote. Great question. And I know I've already brought this book up like 100 times in the past, and 100 more times in the future if you're time traveling. But Richard Wiswall's book, The Organic Farmer's Business Handbook, is a great place to start, and I will link it in the show notes. He does a whole chapter on writing a business plan that is super helpful for like farms, market gardens, organic farming, whatever. Then find a couple other business books at the library or wherever for additional insight and advice on writing a good business plan. And they don't have to be farm specific, but there are other good farm business books out there. At some point, maybe I should do a whole show about those because there's lots of good ones. Also, liked this from @SomaRob, quote, a failure to plan is a plan for failure. Don't know who said this, but doing stuff on the fly is freedom and fun, but not a formula for success. I get 100% the strong plan and love it, but also the deviation is a constant pull. Sometimes we choose the career that can teach us the things we most need to grow. End quote. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Rob. Yesterday, we talked about raising kids on the farm, and I thought this was poignant from @TheBurnhams, 2925, who wrote, quote, our farm raised kids left for quote unquote greener pastures, and neither has returned to the farming life. Still waiting though, 35 and 40 years respectively, end quote. Thanks. And yeah, that's a bummer. That's another challenge with farm kids is that they see how much easier it is to make money in other places and decide that they should just leave for economic reasons. A lot of older farming communities are hemorrhaging their youth. I've talked about the rural currency, the rural reciprocity, and I think a lot of that energy from older folks to help new and younger ones also comes from the fact that it's good to have a little youth around and they want to see you succeed. Not all of them care, but many of the older folks in the country remember when those rural communities were a happening place. Anyway, great stuff this week, you all. As always, I really appreciate the time you take to thoughtfully respond, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the third segment, so don't yell at me yet. But I really appreciate what you all put in there, and I do read it. Up next, we move some compost and do some lasagna beds. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by GrowSmart. Curious if your soil will be ready for planting this spring? GrowSmart can help you find out with their at-home soil tests. They'll ship it right to your door, Just send it back with your prepaid shipping and you'll have your lab results in just 2 business days. Their reports are simple with tailored seasonal recommendations for fertilizers and amendments. Order now at growsmart.com and use the code DAILY for 10% off. That's DAILY. Begin your soil prep now for a great spring with GrowSmart. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Songhaven Farm, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I just listened to the show talking about the Landsea compost spreader. Getting compost to our beds is definitely one of our largest tasks. Since we are trying to revitalize some 12 years of intensive tilling that has led to massive amounts of Canadian thistle and bindweed, we are delivering about 20 tons of material every spring by wheelbarrow to our half-acre market garden. It makes me wonder about doing more composting in place, i.e. lasagna beds in the fall, where we can deliver material to our beds more easily via trailer. What are your thoughts on this? Thank you, Michelle." End quote. All right, awesome question, Michelle. So the easy, or at least the quick answer to this question is absolutely. Do all the quote-unquote waste work, the muda, as they call it in lean farming, like moving compost. Do all that stuff in the winter and the fall where you can. There are several benefits to this. 1, it's good winter exercise to keep you in shape. 2, it allows for things to break down and get ready for spring planting. And 3, if you're used to doing this work in the spring, as it sounds like you are, doing this stuff in the fall and winter, especially with the help of a trailer, is a great way to spread the workload over the season so you're not resting all winter and then going straight into a dead sprint in the spring. Now, the phrase lasagna gardening caught my eye because that can mean a lot of different things, but I think is an important part of your question because of the timeline you laid out. So for those of you who don't know, lasagna gardening is where you are stacking compost or potentially manure and carbonaceous materials like hay in layers like lasagna, which, fun fact, is only delicious so long as you let some of the pasta on the top get crispy. That's just science. Probably. Anyway, lasagna beds are made similarly to lasagna where you have a layer of carbon, a layer of compost, a layer of carbon, a layer of compost. The idea being that some of that carbon will slowly break down and feed the soil or create a nice bed rich with nutrients, preferably creating a really nice weed-free surface and perhaps reducing the amount of compost you will need, as well as the amount of potential nitrogen loss as it gets tied up in the carbonaceous material. However, evidenced by the timeline laid out here, it's generally a good idea to allow for these beds to settle and even break down a little bit before planting. So indeed, doing it in the fall is ideal so that they can be good to go by the spring. Now, I have tried this with cardboard, mulch paper, hay, straw, but straw is the one I generally recommend and prefer, especially with increasing concerns about PFAS in cardboard. I will say that the hay, when we used that, did not break down as well for the fact that it was stubborn and does not want to break down, but things grew fine. There was just a lot of hay left underneath of the compost for longer than we kind of wanted it to be there. What about wood chips? Well, I do remember Dan Oostenbrink of Local Harvest Farm in Canada said he used chicken manure piled on wood chips as bed formation technique, and with enough time, I could see that working. The one issue I could see with using straight manure or raw manure is weed seeds. The value of composting manure first is that it breaks down weed seeds plus diseases and many chemical residues. So that's something to consider before, because that won't really happen in a lasagna bed. You may still run into those weed seed / potentially herbicide issues or whatever. If using compost, and the compost is already highly carbonaceous though, I would be cautious about using wood chips as the carbon layer. It would probably take a long time for them to break down for it to be fully ready to roll by spring. Also, who do I petition to get the word wood chips turned into one word? My word processor loads it when I use that term. Anyway, I think having that carbon element, especially with that much compost, is a great idea, especially in terms of more responsible nutrient management. So I hope that's helpful. Otherwise, let me know your thoughts on lasagna beds or lasagna in general. Unless you don't think the pasta on top should have a little crisp to it, then I don't want to hear it. Anyway, up next, let's talk about how farms are magnets. Sorta. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand.
I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show.
So after Monday's show, a couple people did that thing where they commented that they were unfollowing the show because they follow my work to learn about farming, not hear about politics. Obviously, the vast majority of you, I would argue almost all of you, recognize that I did not go very far out of my lane on this topic. Small farmers trying to do ecological things and grow organic food, having the government freeze established contracts that help them to do those things is not a big stretch of a topic, even if we don't all agree on it. I mean, no topic we discuss here, from growing peppers to raising kids, is something that everyone is going to agree on. And honestly, I thought that the government contracts was a topic that sparked great conversations and comments from all sides. As I always say, I have the smartest comment section on YouTube, and I learned from people I didn't necessarily agree with, which is great. I love that, even if it feels uncomfortable or disruptive. What I find so interesting, if not just elegant, about that is that there are just so few spaces where that happens anymore, where people from all sides of the political spectrum convene and debate. Each side has its corner and rarely do the two cross. But one thing I learned early on about farming is that it captures the interest of a wide swath of people, from conservative to libertarian and to progressive and liberal and everything in between. No two people find their way to farming for the same reasons. There is something for everyone in this business. And for that reason, shows like this, shows about chemical-free agriculture, ecology, but really just soccer, offer a space where ideas can be shared or seen. Ideas that may make us uncomfortable or challenge what we believe, and I'm talking as much about myself as about you all, but a place where opposing viewpoints can mingle, sometimes even cross-pollinate. All that to say, I love that there are nerds on all sides of the aisles here, and I'm glad that farming kind of brings us all together, even if it's messy, even if it's ridiculous sometimes. I think it's a good thing. I think it's fun. I think it's difficult in a rewarding way. I think we're all better for it when we are not just sitting in our corners talking to people who share our exact ideas. To be honest with you, I've seen somewhat of a sad trend fueled by that over the last decade of people not at all having a real understanding of what the opposing side believes. We often carry these sort of false, sometimes dehumanizing caricatures around of the opposing viewpoints, and it's only going to get worse unless we actively work at it and refine those images. And why not through farms and farming conversations? Now, I will continue to stay in my lane, but when politics swerve in, I'm going to have to honk at them. Like maybe with one of those horns that, like the specialty car horns that do like play like La Cucaracha. I kind of always wanted one of those. And anyway, when I do, I hope you will feel encouraged to debate, respectfully, of course, but also open to, or rather interested in, learning something. More than anything, embrace the opportunity to mingle with those you don't normally get to mingle with. May make some new friends. So unfollow the show if you want, but we'll still all be over here partying. All right, that is a wrap for this week. Don't forget to catch Brighton versus Chelsea today. I know some of you already have that on the calendar, no doubt. So anyway, there's plenty of college basketball this weekend. Go Cats. Before we go, I want to give one last shout out to the folks at Rimmel Greenhouses for making this possible. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble. Remember, I did it. So I think anybody can do it, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Big thanks to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers for their support. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music. See what I did there? Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer over at No Till Growers to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-till growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of February, you get a shout on this show. So big shout outs today to Lisa Crabtree, which I'm not 100% sure is my mother-in-law, but there's probably other Lisa Crabtrees in the world, but let's just assume that is my mother-in-law. So shouts to Lisa. Also our weeklies. Let's see what we got here. Randall Duran, Maina, and Stephen Smith. They are, so in this, let's call it a mini-series, they are taking a tour of the Mississippi from all the way up north, all the way down to the Gulf. And what they're doing is that they actually have like a miniature tugboat, super cute. I would totally take one. It's like a mini tugboat. So anyway, Lisa is the tour guide, and she's taking them down the river. And at some point, somewhere like in southern Illinois, kind of mid-southern Illinois, they see in the distance behind them a pirate ship, like legit total pirate ship, pirate flags, all the, the skull, crossbones, all those things. And they start to worry because it's like bearing down on them. And anyway, this series follows like the harrowing adventures and Lisa's heroism, no doubt, in keeping them safe. And it's a good story. And also pirates on the Mississippi, who knew? Anyway, have a great weekend, you all. We will see you on Monday. Thanks for watching and/or listening. Bye.